Welcome back to France Made Simple, the podcast where I demystify life in France, tell it like it really is, and debunk some of the many myths that surround those of us who choose to live and work here. So today we've got something a bit different. We've had a lot of factual information-based episodes recently, so I thought it would be quite nice to tell you a bit more about how I ended up in green bean hell. So here's today's story, children. Grab a cup of something, a cup of tea, cup of coffee, glass of wine, nice cold beer, sit back and enjoy. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who lived in London. And she really didn't like living in London. She always wanted to live in the countryside and have ponies and a big vegetable patch and chickens and a cocker spaniel called Toby. But unfortunately, none of this was on offer because she lived in Streatham. So she used to escape into her own little world and read and read and read to escape from the reality of living in inner London and being at a primary school where she didn't like most of the children and they all picked on her. And one of her favourite books, series, was the Little House on the Prairie series. And she read and reread and reread these and increasingly lived in a little dream world inside her head where she wanted nothing more than to be in a log cabin in the middle of nowhere. Now, obviously, this wasn't very possible or feasible, so she did the next best thing, and with her two younger brothers, she played Little House on the Prairie. Now, luckily, they had a really decent dressing up box, which was full of all kinds of things, one of which was a red Indian headdress, complete with long brown woolly plaits. Another item was a little gingham sundress, which became known as the Carrie dress. Now, anybody who's read Little House on the Prairie will know that Carrie was the younger sister. So this little girl, and I'm sure you can probably all start to imagine who this might have been, used to play Little House on the Prairie with her two younger brothers. Sometimes this would involve climbing on top of the big old chest of drawers, which bizarrely now is in our house in France, and my daughter keeps all of her bits and bobs in it. But the chest of drawers was big enough to be turned into a wagon with the rocking horse hitched up to the front so they could all travel into the far west. When the weather was better, she would take her two little brothers into the garden and they would play Little House on the Prairie. Now, this being the 1970s and nobody being particularly politically correct, the adopted brother, who was obviously dark-skinned, became the Red Indian, obviously. He got to wear the Indian headdress and the bow and arrow and, whoop and holler around the apple tree. And the younger brother, who was little and blonde and very pretty and almost girl-like, got unceremoniously stuffed into the Carrie dress and tied to a tree. This happened in every episode. Inevitably, the little girl and her younger brother would get bored of playing Little House on the Prairie and they'd go off inside and raid the biscuit tin, leaving the littlest one tied to the tree. Eventually, their mother found out and put a stop to the game, simply because she wasn't particularly comfortable with her youngest child being left tied to the apple tree at the bottom of the garden for hours on end, and he's probably still got residual and slightly resentful trauma about that. But in any case, the little girl grew up and still wanted to leave London. So as soon as she could, she bought a house in the Surrey countryside. And then pretty soon after that, due to the fact that she was stuck at home with lots of small children and nothing better to do than watch TV in the early evenings whilst waiting for her other half to return from the office, she got addicted. Now, she got addicted to what most of us got addicted to in the late 80s, early 90s, escapist TV. First, there was 30-something. That's probably why she got married for the first time, because she wanted to be married to somebody called Gary, who was a photographer or worked in media and was shooting hoops in the backyard whilst grilling stuff on a barbecue and wearing sweatpants and looking really cool. That didn't work out so well, so she then started watching Escape to the Country, A New Home in the Sun, etc., etc. And all those kind of programmes, which at the time used to feature presenters skipping round derelict farmhouses in high heels, saying things like, "Oh, and for another £5,000, you could turn this derelict barn into some wheelchair-friendly sheets." And then you'd see Bob and Belinda from Birmingham saying, "Oh, I could just fancy seeing myself sitting on this terrace with my morning tea." Sorry, that was a shit Birmingham accent, but you get the drift. Anybody that watched those programmes and fell for their claptrap back in the day will know what I'm talking about. We all thought we could put a kind of semi-derelict French cottage on our credit cards and live happily ever after. So the little girl, who was quite big by this stage, did just that and sodded off to France with all her worldly goods in a shipping container, her 3 children, 2 dogs and a cat. I'd like to say that she bought a derelict manoir in the Tarn and successfully renovated it, hand polished limestone flagstone by flagstone, and is now living happily ever after, wafting through meadows dressed from head to toe in Bowden, or maybe linen, hosting yoga retreats for llamas. But no, she bought a hovel in the Breton countryside and then bought and sold numerous other hovels, and all the while never quite gave up on her little house on the prairie, self-sufficient, self-sustainable lifestyle type of dream. Bit deluded was our heroine. Anyway, 20 years on, and that's a whole nother story of everything that's happened in the last 20 years in France, but I'll save that for the memoirs or the tell-it-all How Not to Move to France book, landing on your shelves next year, if I ever get my arse into gear and write it. But I've started. That's always a good starting point, I think, to make a start. Anyway, 20 years on, I can honestly say, because it is me, if you haven't already guessed that I'm still yearning for that vegetable patch, stone-edged garden, cottage by the sea, washing on the line, pantry full of things I've pickled and preserved. And I think I've done quite well, really, given that I grew up in London and we didn't really eat anything that didn't have a barcode on it. Maybe you might have picked the odd blackberry or two. So I have got quite good. And last year, me and Monsieur started a vegetable patch. Obviously, he's grown up in the French countryside and knows about all this kind of shit. I don't. But it had been a long time since he'd done anything of a manual nature in the garden for various reasons. So we started a vegetable garden last very late spring. We were very late. Everybody in the village was making comments about how our potatoes were never going to make it because we'd been too late in planting them. Now, the other thing to remember is the French do still all garden by the moon. There are actually books that you can buy about when to plant your carrots according to the moon cycle. I'm all for being in touch with one's lunar cycles, etc. But worming my horses when the moon's in the right place and planting my carrots accordingly, not so much. Anyway, we were late with our potatoes and our green beans and various other things, and it was all a bit kicks, bollock and scramble, but we ended up with a decent potato crop that pretty much did us through the winter. Our green beans were extensive. He could not believe just how many beans the plants produced. So this year we were a lot more organised and we started a lot early and got the whole thing properly rotivated and dug loads of manure and compost in, and even got some, what are they called in English? Ground sheets, geotextile, plastic kind of bash things with holes in so that all our little seedlings wouldn't get choked by the voracious French weeds. Anyway, I will stick some videos up and photos on my Instagram because I am pretty proud of our vegetable patch this year. And we planted all kinds of things that people around these parts don't normally plant. Like we've got sweet corn, black radish, normal radishes, green beans, courgettes, yellow courgettes, salsify, lots of lettuces, thanks to Mr. Wazza. So thank you for those seeds. Lots of other interesting stuff, horseradish, you name it, it's gone in there. And it's really, really productive. So that's all well and good, but we've now reached harvest time. Well, obviously we've reached harvest time a few weeks ago, started harvesting, but we're now probably into peak harvest time. And there's always this amazing thrill when you pick your first lot of green beans. And I like green beans, and I like picking green beans, but bloody hell, after 3 or 4 weeks of non-stop bean picking, they show no sign of abating. It is just unbelievable the quantity we've harvested. Quite possibly because we overplanted. We've got dwarf ones and climbing ones and a second row, and he was talking about putting in a third row. Thank God I said please don't, because I don't know what we're going to do with all of these green beans. Or I didn't until a couple of weeks ago when we went to a vide grenier and there was a steriliser there. And it was €30, I think, but brand new, and they are really expensive, sort of 80 to 100 euros. So we ummed and ahed about it, and then I said to him, give me 20 euros and I'm going to go and negotiate. And he was like, no, the guy will never drop 10 euros. And I was like, trust me, Londoner. Anyway, I came away with my steriliser for 20 euros, and we then bought some jars before we realised that actually the Bon Coin was a much better source of vintage Le Parfait jars, and then we scrounged a load off the neighbours, and since then we have been sterilising everything that you can lay your hands on. I've got jars of cherry tomatoes, jars of ratatouille, jars of green beans, jars of sweet corn. We also bought a dryer, and we've been drying figs, plums and courgettes, because I figured we've got so many courgettes, they take up shitloads of room if you try and freeze them. There's only so much ratatouille you can make, especially without buying more tomatoes and peppers to go in it. And that is not the aim of the game here. We've got loads of onions and garlic, but we did need tomatoes and peppers for the ratatouille too. So we've been dehydrating the peppers. We've got jars of courgettes. We've got jars of dehydrated courgettes, which are surprisingly like crisps. So anybody that comes around here for an apéro in the winter is going to get fed courgette crisps. It's all very Little House on the Prairie. So I am finally fulfilling my Little House on the Prairie lifestyle fantasies. Then we decided to up the ante by going fishing. Well, I really liked the idea of going fishing in the Bay of Mont Saint-Michel, and I saw myself sort of prancing across the sand with a, I don't know, little shrimping net over my shoulder. I'd always wanted one when we came here on holiday as children, and we were so poor at the time. I don't think I ever got one. I always wanted a shrimping net with a little wooden handle. But no, it turns out fishing is a lot more kind of blood and guts than that, and we are going prawn fishing in the next week or so, but in the meantime we've been out fishing for mullet in French, or mullet in English. Now, I didn't even know that mullet swam around the bay. I didn't know they were there in huge quantities, and I certainly didn't know that they're absolutely flipping delicious. So a friend made a 15-metre long fishing net. You can imagine how much that weighs. Luckily, in the spring, Monsieur spotted an old milk churn cart, the kind that people used to push out to the fields to milk their 2 cows, and very cleverly bought it, restored it and fitted it with 2 massive fat tyres, you know, the kind that you put on a bike that goes across the sand. There's kind of all those ponces around Hossegor trottle around on in the towns with their man buns and their flip-flops going, yo dude. Anyway, we bought a couple of tyres like that, stuck them on the cart, which now means you can push it across the sand, and this is really useful when you go fishing. So originally I thought, okay, that's great, we can put our flip-flops and the picnic in the cart and the fishing net. Didn't realise that you have to cross a river, tow your chariot through it. Very Little House on the Prairie, that bit. I remember them fording rivers in the wagons and the horses nearly getting swept away. Well, my friend Nicole nearly got swept away on the way back when she decided to leave the fishing party early at some point. We hadn't quite clocked that the tide hadn't gone out enough. Luckily, she had the wit to stuff her phone in her bra and was holding apparently the rubbish that she'd picked up off the beach in one hand and her filleted fish in the other hand, and managed to make it across the river, but nearly got rescued by another lady who was out walking her dog. That's another story. Anyway, so you have to push your cart across the river. Then you have to walk about 40 minutes across the sand in the vague direction of Mont Saint-Michel and Tombelaine. And it looks like there's nothing there. And you're walking across the Gobi Desert, and suddenly you come to a river or a sort of creek, an inlet. And then there's a dip in the sand, and you wait there, and the tide comes in. And the amazing thing is, it comes in one single wave. So you're kind of standing there watching it, and you can just see this water just coming towards you like that. It's just unbelievable. Really, really beautiful. Then, between 3 and 4 people, your ideal fishing party, I'd say, is 6 max. Leap into the water with the net, 2 people hold the net at either end, and the other sort of people hold the middle up and try and stop it flopping down. Wade across the river, and then as the fish come in on the rising tide and jump around everywhere, you kind of run back towards the shore with the net and hopefully catch some fish. Well, we got really good at it really quickly, and we've been fishing a couple of times now, and the quantity of fish that we've come back with is just unbelievable. So then they all got descaled and filleted in place or in situ on the beach. The gulls thought that was great because they got the bits and bobs, and 2 seals even came to have a look at what we were doing, which was... Obviously, they stayed in the water, thankfully, especially as one was some great big harbour seal. Spot the Londoner. I'm like, oh, it's so cute. He's such a big seal. And somebody else said, yeah, they're quite dangerous, Catherine, and that's quite a big one. So, don't get in the water there. Oh, okay, I'll stay away from the big seals. And then we return home, pushing our cart with our fish, which is all now in the freezer. So it's all been really fulfilling my little house on the prairie fantasies. Having said that, it is incredibly hard work being that level of self-sufficient, but I cannot tell you how satisfying it is where in the last couple of days we've been eating meals that have been entirely from the garden. Leeks, courgettes, potatoes, garlic, parsley, and of course the fish that we've brought caught even, the fish we've caught ourselves and brought home to the table, and which is now in the freezer. So I suppose all this is to say that if you do yearn for a simpler and more back to nature lifestyle, even if it seems like it's way out of your reach at the moment, and even if it seems like a move to France and a move to the countryside and a move to a lifestyle where you do have the time and space to grow your own produce and keep your chickens and collect your eggs and go fishing and all that kind of stuff, even if it seems like it's unachievable at the moment and it's just fantasy, just like mine was when I was a little girl in Streatham all those years ago, hang on to it. Hang on to that thought, because it really is something that you can do. And that's why, really, I started this podcast and the sister site, Survive France, which helps people who are already here or thinking about making the move. But I very much started this podcast to try and make it as simple as possible for anybody else that wants to do it and wants to join in this sort of absolutely... It is a fabulous adventure. Moving to France is an adventure. Sometimes it's frustrating. Sometimes you want to burst into tears. Sometimes you want to tear your hair out. Sometimes you want to go back. Sometimes you miss everybody. But overall, I wouldn't change it for the world. I wouldn't change the lifestyle I've had here, the experiences I've had, and the people I've met. So I hope this sort of shortish podcast has been inspiring. possibly even vaguely amusing. Just the thought of my friend Nicole nearly losing her phone in the river, me being nearly eaten by the giant seal, just it is ridiculous how one ends up doing things that one never thought one would do. And going fishing is definitely something I never thought I'd do, and I never thought I'd enjoy it either, but it's really good fun. Anyway, I hope that's been interesting. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you as always to our sponsors, Fab French Insurance. And yeah, probably need insurance if you're going fishing as well. You never know what might be out there in the bay. So thank you for listening, and see you next time.